All right, we're about a minute early, but I think we can get started. Calling our meeting to order of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission on June 26th. Excuse me. I think we did review the minutes for June 19th to,
No,
no, I'm sorry, they haven't been
Those are a
distributed.
work in progress. They'll
Right.
be
Okay.
distributed shortly, and we'll approve them next week, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
right, good. Administration, executive search update. Commissioner Zuniga, where are we?
Yes, thank you. We are in the process of interviewing the 4 firms that we selected for interviews, the 4 firms that responded on the executive search firm. We are halfway through that process. We anticipate that the last 2 interviews are scheduled for tomorrow, and fully anticipate that I will be coming back to this commission with a recommendation by the next meeting. After tomorrow, I will finalize my memo on recommendations, and will be coming again for approval. There are a couple of questions that I want to pose that started just to come up relative to the next steps that I think we should at least think about. And one of them has to do with the interface and the profile of the executive director for this position. How is that director going to interface with this commission? Clearly, I've explained that as per the statute, this commission hires and that executive director and serves at the pleasure of this commission. But these questions have come in the context of how the organization is going to be structured, which I know our consultants are also working on that. So it's a little bit timely that we start thinking about it. And also a couple of other notions. One of them, for example, we have said that we want a gaming experience on the individual, but we probably need to clarify as to whether experience in the regulatory arena as opposed to industry is what we really mean, or whether it's irrespective of where that experience may come from. So just another provocative question we've had was, would we be looking for a leader or a manager or a combination? And these are good things to start thinking about relative to the upcoming search. So I just kind of pose them as an update. I also want to have us start thinking about the next step in the process. Who among us will be project managing the executive search firm? I don't want it to be just assumed that it would be me because I was given this task of conducting the procurement. So I kind of also wanted to bring that up as a topic for discussion, but we can take it now or not. I just wanted to give those
Well, I have
topics.
a little bit the instinct that this is so important. We want to make sure that by the end of the day next Tuesday that we are moving forward. We have our choice, and we can authorize them to get going. So if maybe it's worth spending a little bit of time now about some of those issues, certainly to see if there's any significant decision making, but just to go through them. I'm not sure what you meant by how we want to relate to the first issue that you put out there, the organizational structure and how we relate to the person. But I think certainly from my standpoint, we're looking for a very strong CEO of the Gaming Commission. I very much see myself as chair of the commission, not as anything remotely close to a part of the executive leadership of the entity. So very broad management skills. We're going to talk about the bureau. I think our preliminary conviction is that everybody in the agency except the commission and the commission's direct staff, like Janice, would report to the person. I think presumptively we would clearly want regulatory experience, administrative. We're talking about somebody who knows how to run a gaming regulatory agency. That's the most critical variable that there is. Now, there can be exceptions, you know, I wouldn't make it, I mean, if there's some home run person, we can think about it, but as to parameters, I would say that's absolutely a presumptive precondition.
Yeah,
I can speak to that also. I think in wording it, I think sometimes what is helpful, so you're not precluding other candidates, is to say that regulatory gaming experience preferred. And that way, candidates understand it's preferred, and if someone still thought they could, come to the top without that experience, it certainly, we'd take a look. But I think if you say preferred, you don't preclude other candidates, but yet you're letting it be known that that is the preference. As far as your question about a leadership or a manager, certainly this would be the leader of the organization as far as management of all those folks. Now, I think the best leaders, certainly they inspire, they get others to follow, but they also have great management skills. So in many ways, I think it's not either or. It is a leader that possesses management skills. So I think that's the way I would look at that in those two questions that you posed.
I agree with that as well, but is part of whatever the search firm does going to be to put together a challenge document or a job description or something that we all get a chance to talk about before the actual posting occurs?
absolutely, and that's what I was perhaps alluding to. At least the two firms that we've interviewed, actually everybody on their responses articulated an initial period of fine-tuning the job description and the profile of the individual. And because that's really the immediate step after we make a selection, and because we all need to move efficiently, these are some of the questions that started to come up that I figured it's important to start considering. Just affirmation that the gaming regulatory piece is preferred, but of course there's many factors and aspects to any kind of these types of positions. But I also wanted to go back to the next steps for this commission. I mentioned I did not want to assume that I would be the one project managing this process. Perhaps this is an opportunity to go back to an initial assumption that Commissioner Stebbins would be part of that, or whether we have made have additional thoughts as to whether it's one of us or I would continue doing this process. But I wanted to make sure that what my task was in conducting this procurement, which soon will come to a conclusion with the recommendation, would be picked up quickly after when that happened.
I'm more than happy to become back involved in this part of it, either as one member of the commission or with another commissioner's help, but to kind of keep moving the process along. The question about I just want to pick up on what Commissioner Cameron said. We are in a sense looking for a leader. There isn't anybody. We're not having somebody who's stepping into an existing organization. We're having somebody step in who's got to help build the organization. And I certainly see staff development as a key piece of that. I mean, I think in some of the outreach we've done and the people we've talked to about initial positions, there's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of talent that, again, hasn't had experience in the gaming industry or even the regulatory side of it. But certainly some people who I think can be nurtured along as we kind of refine positions, change positions. Somebody who might be a jack of 3 or 4 trades suddenly falls into a category of one position or series of responsibilities. I think having a leader who can kind of pick those skills out, just not manage a process, but help us build a process and help us build a team. So, that leadership quality is key, I think, as we go forward.
I'm not sure that there's really a distinction here, but in a way, I think we have a lot of leaders. You know, we have a lot of people who have had very senior leadership positions, almost all of us really. And in a way, I kind of, if this is a meaningful distinction, I kind of think we need really great manager first and foremost, you know, almost a really super project manager at a high end who understands the regulatory business, who understands the gaming business, and really knows how to make the trains run on time. There's really a good systems person, you know, really a good, you know, performance review systems type person, you know, who really knows how to put, you know, it's I think of it as, to the extent that you have to err on one side or the other, we don't need, you know, we don't need spiritual leadership, we don't need team building, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we've got a lot of people that know how to do it. And our presence is we're gonna be the five of us still floating around, so I really think we want a very, very capable, professional, trained, experienced manager. Now, by definition, they'll probably end up having leadership skills, but that's my instinct for what it's worth.
Well, we have our consultants pulled together kind of an initial job description for us to probably build off of and work off of as we proceed to the next step. But it's certainly something that would involve everybody's buy-in and sign-off before we go to the next step of posting the
Yeah.
position.
As far as who ends up project managing, what does that mean exactly? Once we make the decision,
Yeah.
how do you define what needs to be done?
Well, just to state the most basic of who would sign the contract with them and would be the point person for the day-to-day, for either the reporting, scheduling, et cetera. In the case of our consultants, you, Mr. Chairman, are that person. I just wanted to give
Right.
that a thought as we move forward. Again, I'm more than happy to do that myself, if that's assumed,
Right.
but I just wanted to bring that up. If
Yeah.
it's a good way to involve another commissioner and comply with all the open meeting rules, I think it's worthy of considering because it's such a meaningful
Yeah.
search.
I think that for this one, this is really our most important hire to date, certainly, and probably will be the most important hire we make. And we ought to deal with this in the more formal route of creating a subcommittee to work on this. And
That requires public meetings?
it does.
Yeah,
But,
okay.
but they can be an executive session for the preliminaries, records are kept, and a whole series of formalities that I think we ought to deal through, and I'll try and outline those for us for the next week after consultation with our attorneys. But I preliminarily consulted with them, and they're of the same opinion. So I'll be prepared to prepare an outline and move forward with that, or recommend that next week.
I just have some concerns about that route. I think that candidates, and I think one way we may be able to manage this is to have, advisory group assist us with this. I think that the candidates will be looking at, all have other jobs, and would be very concerned that that information would be out to the public. And I really have a concern about us not having the strongest candidates in the mix if we handle the entire process that way. I really have a concern about that, and I think we should consider it.
But the process doesn't envision everybody being out in the public until you get to the finalists. The one or two finalists who emerge from the pack are the only ones who will be out in front. But there are a number of other formalities to follow through and to go through, and the interviewing process done and can be done without having people exposed to the public view until the finalists emerge.
So for us, we could set up a subcommittee, but still, and in order that we had the record keeping that's
Right.
required by public meetings and so forth.
Right.
But we could also have that subcommittee be the initial screening group. They
Right.
could do preliminary interviews,
Right.
and those would not have to be public
Right.
interviews.
Right.
Right, and as long as,
I mean, I need to work through the
Yeah,
details
okay.
of that, but
But that's the
a
intent.
basic, that's the basic protocol and a basic approach to follow.
It was my understanding, and in interviewing a couple of these search firms, they look at their responsibility as all the initial screening and all that initial work, and then it would be their responsibility to bring a couple of finalists to the commission.
One can structure it in a number of different ways, and certainly the search firm's responsibility is to go out and beat the bushes to get a pool of the most highly qualified candidates, and one can ask them to bring back X number of people to interview. And the ones that I've been involved in, they brought back, in one case, they brought back 10, in that case, the full search committee interviewed. One can do it in a variety of different ways. But the ultimate point is that until you get to the finalists for the commission's decision, whether it's done by the search firm or by a subcommittee or some other way, only the finalists are the ones that appear in a public session. So we can manage it that way. And I think we ought to do this one with the formalities that attend this kind of a search.
And, you know, the history, the UMass search, you know,
And-
that went off the tracks is one that people will remember that and be looking at us to make sure that
Right.
we are. So, you know, the issues would be the confidentiality issue that Commissioner Cameron's raising, and speed. You know, I think
Right.
those are two things we care about.
Right.
But if we can do the more formal process without compromising those two things, you know, I think that's a good way to go. But let's hold this until you can put together a plan. I do think if there is going to be a subcommittee, formal or informal, that is going to do any preliminary screening, usually there's a search committee. The search firm brings people back to the search committee, and the search committee interviews some number of people, and that gets winnowed down to finalists. Whether we're going to have a search committee that plays that role, and I don't think we haven't figured that out yet.
Well, that's what I was talking about, the subcommittee
Right,
role
right,
being.
but Commissioner Cameron was saying, do we really want to do that? And
Well, I understand
I don't
that.
know. So,
I had a question. So you're talking about folks that are not commissioners? You're talking about an advisory group?
No, I was talking about a subcommittee of the committee, it could, of the commission. But it could include people outside the commission too. But a subcommittee has a certain formality and certain trappings of formality that it has to follow. And it is the UMass search that I had in mind, and
Right.
Be happy as part of this package to circulate to you the letter that I have in the wake of that, just so we can see what the steps would be helpful to take.
and this is one that you would have been familiar with this, but it was one where the Attorney General severely reprimanded the president and the head of the trustees of UMass for doing a search which breached all the public meeting and made it look as if there was sort of an inside deal. It was bad story for UMass. And people are going to be sensitive to that. So we're going to have to mind our P's and Q's on this one. Anyway, so we can talk more about this when Commissioner McHugh's had a chance to tee up a recommendation and then make a final decision. But I think we know what the issues are. And we can, let's wait until next week to also, we can make a decision. I think the idea of having a search committee that has some people from the outside is kind of a good idea. That might be worth thinking about.
I do
Right.
agree.
Okay, so we'll tee this up again on Tuesday. Anything else on that?
Nope, no, it's
And, you
really
know,
just,
As far as who signs it, I don't think that makes any difference,
right.
but I think, that, you know, who chairs the subcommittee?
Who
If
chair-
we have a
yes,
subcommittee,
that's
is
right.
really the question.
that's the question I was.
And it's, you know, I half think maybe that should be the chair.
That could very well.
But I'm open to discussion on that for sure. Additional hires, we now have 3 in the pipeline, I think. We're right down to final drug testing, I think. We are hopefully within minutes away, or days, hours away from being able to announce a Director of Administrative Services, a receptionist, and an executive assistant, all three, but we're not quite there, and we have agreed not to make anything public until everything is finished. But that's coming quickly. Anything on discussion of internal policies? Do we have?
Well, the update is, since last week, Commissioner McHugh has given me some good and a number of comments on the draft that I put together, and we were looking to sit down and go through them perhaps as early as tomorrow. Is that?
Yes.
So we're moving along on making good progress on that employee handbook.
We hope to have that done in the very near future.
All right, great.
One other internal policy that we should think about, particularly in light of next week, is that under the open meeting law, one can have absentee participation. There are five, I think, criteria that permit somebody who's not present to participate in the commission meetings. That there are various requirements we have to follow in order to do that. Number one being that the participant's voice has to be audible, which is a pretty fundamental requirement. But in order to do that, we all have to, or the commission has to vote to allow absentee participation. And we do that as a one-time matter. And then if the criteria for absentee participation exist, one of which is a commission member being at some geographical distance that would make it impossible for him or her to attend, then the presiding officer at the hearing simply says that that's the case, and you move forward with the absentee participating by telephone. So in order to set the stage for that and have in place the foundation, we need to do that when and if the occasion arises. I'd move that the commission authorize the commission, ourselves, to allow absentee participation under the criteria that the open meeting law permits.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I mean, just a quick question. Do we have the capacity to do that in this room?
I'm not sure whether we,
Do we have the capacity to do that here? Oh, there we go. All right, good.
Closer, sorry, yeah. I won't be here next, well, actually, our meeting's gonna be Monday, right? We've just, yeah, so for anybody who's a regular watcher, because Tuesday is the day before July 4th, we are moving our meeting to Monday, this location, same time, right? Monday, 1 to 4. That would be July 2nd, I guess. I will not be here. I will be calling in. I am mandated to chair, but I can designate another chair, and I think, since I'm not going to be physically present, I think I'd like to designate Commissioner McHugh, the secretary, to be the chair that meeting.
all right.
If that's okay with you. Okay. We have a ton of meat this day, so let's get to it. Racing division, status report, et cetera.
Okay, just a few updates. We have put a financial oversight plan in place where there are approvals at management level of DPL and the recommendations for me to make final approvals. We talked through that process, and we are comfortable with that approval process for paying the bills, the expenditures. Secondly, we are continuing to work on an ISA for fiscal year 13. Just a couple of legal issues that we're working out there to make sure we're proceeding in a smart manner.
This is for the transfer of the monies?
Yes,
Back and
and
forth? Or the general operations?
the
Same
general
thing, yeah,
operations,
okay.
exactly right. That at the end of June, that the new fiscal year will take place in July, so we are working on that, and that will be done before the end of the year. And thirdly, I did hold the Gaming Commission's Racing Division first meeting / hearing last Thursday, in which we took care of some routine track matters, and there were 3 appeals of which I presided over, and I will have recommendations for the full commission at next week's meeting. We're preparing determinations this week, and I will have recommendations next week on those 3 matters. And that's all I have to report, Mr. Chair.
Have you rescheduled our field trips yet?
We have not. The Chief of Staff is in charge of field trips, and we have not rescheduled at this point. We will be doing so.
Just don't do them when I'm on vacation. I know. Okay. Project work plan. First is the ongoing notice of proposed wheelmaking. Anything, this is now, we've invited the public to comment on the regulations that we will be issuing about the first phase of the RFA, the request for applications. And even as we're drafting regulations for the request for applications, we're asking the public and participants to comment on that. Anything going on?
We've had 2 comments thus far, Mr. Chairman, both helpful from individuals who are not part of the industry. The period for commentary remains open for another couple of weeks, and we very much look forward to receiving additional comments. The comments are on the concept at a high level. Is the bifurcated process a good process? What things should we keep in mind and think about as we move forward with the rulemaking to implement it? And so the public is invited to make comments, and we look forward to receiving them.
Great. Consultant status report, gentlemen. Introduce yourselves to our audience.
Guy Michael and Carol?
Bob Carroll, Michael and Carol.
Michael and Carol.
Michael and Carol. Okay. Michael and Carol from Michael and Carol. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting us to report on our various activities. I guess the first order of business would be to report to you on what we've been working on and how far we've come in some of the various areas. Over the course of the last week, we have delivered a number of different documents to you, some memoranda that we will be discussing later on in our presentation here. We've also been meeting with members of the commission and various agencies to discuss memoranda of understanding that may need to be or will need to be engaged in between different agencies. We've talked about table of organization issues and are in the process of drafting tables of organization options for the commission, and discussed timelines for the application process and the investigation under the, we're now calling the Phase 1 process, RFA Phase 1. There are some new initiatives that we've also taken on this week. We're defining basically what needs to be covered in the memoranda of understanding. In some cases, there indeed may not need to be as many memoranda of understanding as we maybe originally had thought, which is a good thing, that procedures are in place, pre-existing procedures that can be utilized as the commission begins its work. We have met with those various agencies with which the MOUs would be engaged, with the Attorney General's office, with State Police, and with ABC, Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission. We continue to work on a number of other matters. We are completing the application forms in general, both the multi-jurisdictional form, discussing whether that would be adopted in whole or in part and in what particular ways, and the Massachusetts supplement that would accompany that. It's fairly typical for jurisdictions to use those standard forms, but in every jurisdiction there are modifications based on the unique needs and the aspects of the legislation in that jurisdiction. We are finalizing our timeline. We'll discuss that a little bit further on the RFA 1, the Phase 1 process, when we expect the regulations can be considered by the commission and can be promulgated for public consideration and then ultimately adopted. And our main thrust over the past week or so has been the drafting of the regulations themselves. And we are hopeful, as we'll discuss in the timeline, to get those to you very promptly. We are continuing to work with the Anderson and Krieger firm, the Massachusetts law firm, to integrate the Massachusetts peculiar, I shouldn't say peculiar, the Massachusetts specific aspects of procedure into the what are more generalized gaming standards. And we actually met with them about an hour ago. So we will continue to work on those areas and any others, obviously, that the commission chooses to give to us. But we have our hands full, and we are very hopeful that we'll be able to meet the timing standards that I think Bob's going to discuss in a minute and go through the various timelines.
Great.
Is that okay?
Timeline?
Do the timeline?
Okay, thank you.
So this is one of the memos, right, that you're
Right.
talking from?
June 18th, 2012.
Right.
As you know, there's,
Proposed RFA Phase 1 timeline, if it's in
Correct.
your packets.
we have been focused, as Guy's indicated, we focused our efforts on researching and preparing regulations that the commission will need in order to commence and implement the request for applications process with a almost exclusive focus now on the Phase 1 aspects. That, as we've publicly announced, is one for the pre-qualification of potential applicants. As part of that, we have been asked by the commission to produce a projected timeline consistent with what we know our experiences in the industry, and also trying to fill in the various nuances of Massachusetts law as it relates to regulation creation. In the memo that we've provided here, we've made certain assumptions and so forth, but we believe we've covered the various areas.
Excuse me one second. I see a perplexed look on one of the media's faces, to just make sure we've we agreed that all of the memoranda that came from the consultant were ones we could give to the press. So if somebody can just make sure that Mark has, okay. Did you find it? All right, okay. Now Dan needs to find it. Yeah, proposed RFA Phase 1 timeline. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. We have some flexibility built into this. Obviously, time is critically important to the process, and we've made substantial effort trying to maintain the responsibility to make sure that there's adequate time for input from all of the respective sources and persons and entities of interest, but also to allow for adequate review. As part of it, in the memorandum, you'll notice that it is our intention to get a set of draft regulations that are specific to the RFP Phase 1 process by July 10th. That may be pushed a day either way, but that is our intention. That would be essentially a set of working and operational regulations that would be needed for the commission to move into the pipeline, so to speak, for both public consideration, local government consideration, and for the commission itself in complying with its statutory requirements. As you note in the chart, there is different steps that are mandated by Massachusetts law in terms of notice and input, and they're self-explanatory. What we tried to do was pick, working backwards, adding the different time periods together, and then picking a time in the fall that if everything went perfect, which it rarely does, but giving ourselves a reasonable amount of time, but yet with our accelerator to the floor, so to speak, we looked at October, actually publishing the regulations in the register, provided all of the various inputs and processes have been followed. Working back from that and trying to meet all of the statutory and the legal requirements, we put together these different dates, and I could just highlight a couple of areas that I think would be important. Obviously, the commencement of the drafts, and by draft, what we've done is we've culled through some different jurisdictions in terms of regulations that are standardized to a certain degree in the industry, and then further refined them to comply with nuances of the Massachusetts statute. That draft will be obviously subject to a fair amount of change. It'll be, the core elements will all be there, but some of the nuances will await commission review and suggestions, and obviously the public, as well as Anderson and Krieger, the firm that's providing some legal input, and in fact, other agencies. As Guy mentioned before, we met today with the Attorney General's office and the state police and the ABCC, and they gave us some valuable input that will also be used in the preparation of these regulations. So our expectation is to be able to deliver to you a package of essentially practical operational regulations to be able to commence the process. As you'll notice in here, there is also a notice to the Local Government Advisory Committee. Again, there's projected dates in there. Then there would be a public hearing, obviously. Public notice and filing of responses and input and so forth, and then obviously contact with the Secretary of State. If all goes well and everything is agreed upon going forward and the commission is satisfied with the regulations, then obviously there would be a publication, another opportunity for public hearing and a finalization for written comments. And then the commission would have the opportunity for the final evaluation and for approval. Thereafter, publication, which right now we're projecting roughly is October 12th, 2012. What would that mean? Okay, that would mean that at that point in time, we would have a set of basic fundamental regulations that we believe would be necessary, that should have been vetted by all of the affected agencies, would be compliant with the statute as we understand it, and would enable the commission then to move towards the issuance of the request for applications. That is the objective, and frankly, that's what we've been concentrating on. Any questions on that, Guy?
I just want to, it might be important to underline also what these regulations will not include, as much as what they will. These are, as we've said, the phase one. And what phase one is, the regulations will cover generally are as part of the administrative aspects of the commission's operation, and then the application process, the investigation process, and the hearing process.
This is phase one.
This is phase
Phase
one.
one application.
Right, only applications on the integrity aspects and background of the applicants. It will not include anything regarding the evaluation of the project itself.
Right.
The entire project will not involve employee licensing, it will not involve vendor licensing, nor will it involve the operational controls that are necessary for the casino operation itself. Those will not be necessary at this stage, and so we're focusing on only that which would be required for the phase one vetting process.
Right. Do you anticipate, is there a window between October 12th, when the regs are published, and the release of the RFA? Is there any reason what those, what's the target?
Well, I guess the one variable might be the compacting process for July 31st, and then there's an October deadline in there also for that one region. But in terms of issuance, once the regulations are published, no, then, then the commission could announce.
Because we're working on the disclosure forms in parallel, right? So
Correct.
theoretically, mid-October is both the publication of the regs and, which the participants care about, the release of the
That's correct.
RFA.
The rules,
That's correct.
right.
Right.
All going well, that will be when the applications can be submitted.
Now, it looks to me like one of the major variables here is whether we submit the regs for review to the Local Government Advisory Council when they're still preliminary as opposed to final. And how does that decision get made? Can we do that? Is there an issue there, or how does that decision get made?
Well, Anderson and Krieger has advised us, they are advising us in the process of the regulation approval process. I believe that's something that we'll probably have to wait until we get the final draft of the regulations together to submit to you all. It would seem that the commission could make that decision, but there are certain requirements in terms of the notice. Off the top of my head, I don't recall specifically whether they would have to go out in draft form, but I know there was discussion that there would be input sought from the local governments at the earliest possible stage.
Right.
If that is in draft, it would certainly be before before you make any final decisions or anything like that.
Yes, I understand what Anderson and Krieger have told us is that there are two options. We don't have to do that in order to continue the process. But if we don't do that, then we have to later give them the regulations and the opportunity to review
Right.
them, in which case we
Right.
might be delayed at that point. So to give them the draft initially may expedite the process.
I had a
If I could
related
just
question.
pick up on what Guy said, the real difference is, when we get these regulations on the 10th, the schedule has built into it about a 2-week process, a little bit more, 3 weeks, for us to review them. And before, and this is just in their draft form, this isn't the public hearing, this isn't any of it. It's for us to review them and decide that they're not final necessarily, because we have to go through the process of public hearings and the like. But we're satisfied now that the draft is complete enough, it's got enough finality to it that we're prepared to go forward and put these out for public comment. And the first step in putting them out for public comment is sending them to the Local Government Advisory Committee. We have an option, and that's what these two boxes on the bottom of page 1 indicate. We have an option to send them to the Local Government Advisory Committee before we're finished the process of our own internal vetting and thinking, or waiting until we finish doing that. That's entirely up to us. And it doesn't change the overall timelines at all. It simply gives, if we submit preliminary drafts to the Local Government Advisory Committee, it gives them a little bit longer time to work on them. But they still have 3 weeks, I believe, to work on them in any event. And
Oh, okay.
I
So
have
I
a
misunderstood
view
this.
as to, when the time comes, as to what we ought to do on that one. But
I
The
mis-
process will be dynamic also. I mean,
Right.
there's going to be exchanges and so forth
Right.
that'll require adjustments.
But either way, I thought this was a mistake. Either option still gets us to October 12th.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I
Exactly.
misunderstood,
Yes.
okay. And I guess you're overseeing, it's contingent upon efficient review and editing process, which I guess means us, which probably means Commissioner McHugh. Are you
Well,
the
it
principal?
means, I like as a gateway and tee these things up, but it means that we all have to be involved in the process, and I'll help lay out a plan to do that. But yes, it gives us about 3 weeks to take the handiwork of our consultants, look at it, understand it, have some dialogue with them, and then get it ready for the LGAC by the Local Government Advisory Committee by, in my view, the 31st of July.
Got it, okay, good, I misunderstood, thank you. All right.
Okay.
What do you want to do next?
What's next?
Is one of the other areas that we covered on the memoranda was the revenue sources, if you want to do that one at this point?
Yeah.
You had asked us to identify those sources.
Before we start that for
Okay.
a second, could I just talk about 2 other
Sure.
aspects of this? The other part of this that is important to keep in mind, the other variable, is when we have the public hearing. In order to meet the